2,300 hours. Baltic Sea. 6 Russian oil tankers kill their AIS transponders within 90 seconds of each other. A coordinated blackout that drops 6 vessels totaling roughly 80,000 tons of shipping from every civilian maritime tracking display in the region simultaneously. On the bridge of the lead tanker, the captain watches his own AIS transmitter go dark and feels the particular confidence that comes from disappearing off a map. The problem with that confidence is that it assumes the map is the surveillance architecture. Finland's SOSUS derivative seabed hydrophone network, the Suomenlahti acoustic monitoring system that has been quietly expanded since Finland's NATO accession, had logged the convoy's acoustic signatures when it transited the Gulf of Finland 12 hours earlier. The specific blade rate harmonics of each tanker's propulsion plant, the machinery vibration patterns of their pump systems, the flow noise from their hull geometries at various speeds, all of it recorded, characterized and held in the sensor network's contact database. When the AIS signals went dark, the convoy did not disappear from the operational picture. It became a set of 6 confirmed acoustic contacts with known signatures moving in international waters with their identity suppressed. The P-8A Poseidon that had been holding a surveillance orbit at 20,000 feet for the preceding 4 hours already had the convoy's track. Its AN/APS-154 advanced airborne sensor had been mapping the surface picture since the tankers cleared the Estonian coast. The AIS blackout was logged as an event, time-stamped, and added to the mission record. The aircraft did not alter its flight profile. It did not need to. An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer holding MCON Phase 2, radar off, electronic warfare passive, navigating on data received from the P-8A's Link 16 feed, was already repositioning on an intercept vector that placed it across the convoy's projected course before the tankers reached their intended rendezvous point. The Russian fleet's disappearance from civilian tracking was the beginning of a sequence the American crew had been rehearsing since the convoy left Kaliningrad. Moscow's operational plan for the night had 2 layers. The first was the tanker movement itself. Shadow Fleet vessels believed to be transporting sanctioned cargo through international waters under cover of AIS suppression, a pattern that had been running successfully for months across multiple maritime regions. The second layer activated when the convoy's cover was compromised. Russian Spetsnaz boarding teams on one of the tankers seized a Finnish fishing vessel operating in the area, immediately broadcast a fabricated mayday on international emergency frequencies, claiming the fishermen had been conducting NATO espionage in Russian territorial waters, and positioned the incident as a hostage scenario that would force NATO to justify any interdiction response as aggression against a humanitarian situation. It was a well-constructed legal ambiguity. If NATO responded with force, the Russian state media package was ready. NATO warships attacking a vessel involved in a humanitarian rescue, Russian forces protecting civilians from alliance aggression. If NATO hesitated, the convoy completed its transit and the hostages provided ongoing leverage. The sequence required controlling the narrative before NATO could establish a counter-narrative. That required getting the fabricated footage and scripted testimony out through satellite uplinks before the P-8A's collection could be distributed. The timing miscalculation that the Russian planners had made was about which side had been building its information picture longer. The P-8A's MX-20 HD electro-optical turret, a gyroscopically stabilized imaging system that maintains targeting quality resolution from altitudes where the aircraft is acoustically inaudible from the surface, had been recording the fishing vessel approach, the boarding sequence, and the coercive handling of the Finnish crew from the moment the Spetsnaz team moved. The timeline in the NATO operational record showed the rifles raised against the Finnish captain 11 minutes before the first Mayday transmission was broadcast. The scripted nature of the distress call was documented before it reached a single international receiver. In the information environment this engagement was being fought in, resolution and timestamp were more decisive than any kinetic system. NATO had the definitive record. Russia had a script. Here is where the multi-domain architecture becomes relevant. Controlling the narrative record only solves one problem. The convoy still needed to be stopped, the fishing vessel crew still needed to be recovered, and the Spetsnaz teams still needed to be removed from the vessel without providing grounds for the escalation that Moscow's response protocol was designed to trigger if NATO used kinetic force. Every option that involved firing a weapon gave Russia's information operation its footage. The Arleigh Burke's AN/SLQ-32V 6 electronic warfare suite engaged the convoy's communication architecture first. The SLQ-32 is capable of projecting focused jamming across specific frequency bands at power levels that suppress satellite uplinks within its effective radius without broadcasting its own presence as a detectable jamming emitter to sensors outside that radius. The six tankers' ability to transmit their stage footage and scripted testimony to Moscow's media distribution network collapsed before the convoy crews understood why. Their satellite terminals showed signal strength. Their uplink attempts were failing silently. The propaganda package that had been prepared for immediate broadcast was sitting in the tanker's transmission queues going nowhere. Electronic isolation first, physical isolation second. The Swedish Visby-class corvette element, two vessels that had been holding position 20 nautical miles west of the convoy's track, accelerated to 37 knots. The Visby-class design reflects the specific requirements of Baltic Sea operations. A 620-ton hull built from carbon fiber reinforced sandwich composite material with radar-absorbent surface geometry that gives it a radar cross-section roughly equivalent to a small boat. Water-jet propulsion that produces dramatically less acoustic signature than conventional propellers at equivalent speeds. And weapons systems mounted in recessed housings that do not generate radar returns until they are deployed. Against the Zaslan M radar systems the tankers were using for surface search, the two Visbys were closing at 37 knots and were not generating a trackable return. The Spetsnaz team on the fishing vessel's deck was watching the eastern horizon for a large NATO warship. The watch that mattered was to the west, where two ships generating the radar return of inflatable boats were covering the distance at speeds that made any evasion option irrelevant. The P-8A simultaneously deployed a pattern of SSQ-125 sonobuoys around the convoy's position, configured to broadcast the acoustic signature of Virginia-class attack submarine pump jet propulsors. The sonobuoy broadcast does not produce an actual submarine contact. What it produces is an acoustic environment in which a sonar operator cannot confidently distinguish between a sonobuoy emitter and a submarine hull, at ranges that correspond to weapons engagement distance. For the tanker's sonar operators, the picture showed what could have been two nuclear-powered submarines within torpedo engagement range. The could have been carries most of the psychological weight of the fact itself. If you were the Russian convoy commander at this point, communications suppressed, two untracked corvettes closing your position, acoustic contacts that might be Virginia-class submarines below your keel, what is the order you give? And does that order change if you know the fishing vessel footage is already in NATO's possession with a timestamp that predates your Mayday by 11 minutes? Leave your read below. The Arleigh Burke made her position explicit at 90 seconds from projected intercept. The AN/SLU-1 long-range acoustic device fired a directed high-decibel broadcast at the lead tanker's bridge, the naval equivalent of a loudspeaker that cannot be ignored at 500 yards because the physics of sound pressure at that power level make ignoring it physically uncomfortable. The message delivered in Russian and English was brief and without diplomatic softening. Russian fleet, you are operating as a hazard to navigation. Disperse your formation immediately or prepare to receive a boarding party under international maritime emergency protocols. The Visby element, having closed to 100 yards from the fishing vessel while the Spetsnaz team's attention was on the approaching destroyer, deployed its Bofors Mark 340mm gun from its stealth housing and held position between the tankers and the captured vessel. The specific message this geometry communicated to the Russian boarding team, their extraction route to the tankers, was blocked by a ship they had not detected until it was alongside them, carrying a weapons system with a firing cycle faster than their small arms response time, operated by a crew that had not fired a single round. The Spetsnaz team withdrew. The boarding teams returned to the tanker without their hostages. The fishing vessel crew was recovered by Finnish naval personnel who had been holding 2 nautical miles east throughout the engagement. The convoy reformation that followed was not tactical. It was the mechanical consequence of 6 tanker captains independently making the same calculation. Their communication architecture was suppressed. Their radar picture had just shown them a warship they should have been able to track appearing at 100 yards from a vessel they were responsible for. Their acoustic environment suggested submarines below them, and an Arleigh Burke was generating 9,000 tons of closing momentum toward their formation. One by one, throttles went to full astern. Formation broke, and the convoy scattered on individual headings before reorganizing on a course back toward Kaliningrad. The fishing vessel resumed its operations. The P-8A logged the convoy's withdrawal vectors, speed changes, and communication behavior during the disengagement. The Swedish corvettes returned to their patrol areas. The destroyer resumed its MCON posture and continued its transit. Account for what was exchanged in this operation. Russia's investment. a coordinated 6-tanker Shadow Fleet operation, a Spetsnaz boarding team, a fabricated hostage and media narrative package, and the operational security of the convoy's route. Russia's return. The convoy's transit was blocked, the hostage leverage was eliminated before it produced any diplomatic effect. The media package never reached distribution because the uplink was suppressed before the footage could be transmitted, and the 11-minute timestamp in NATO's P-8A footage record permanently invalidates the Mayday narrative if Russia ever attempts to deploy it through other channels. NATO's investment? P-8A flight hours, 2 Visby corvettes, 1 destroyer, and electronic warfare power consumption for the SLQ-32 engagement window. NATO's return, complete acoustic characterization of 6 Shadow Fleet vessels at operational settings, the Spetsnaz unit's tactical behavior under interdiction pressure, the convoy's communication architecture and the specific uplink frequencies the tankers used for satellite transmission, and a documented operational demonstration that gray zone operations in the Baltic, AIS suppression, fabricated hostage scenarios, coordinated media narratives are being countered by a tri-national sensor and response architecture that closes the gap between the operation's initiation and its exposure faster than the operation's information component can deploy. The Baltic Sea's strategic status has been shifting since Sweden and Finland joined NATO and brought their existing sensor infrastructure, the seabed networks, the coastal radar systems, the maritime patrol aviation that had been optimized for exactly this operating environment for decades, into the alliance's integrated picture. The Russian Shadow Fleet doctrine was built around assumptions about monitoring gaps that existed before that integration. It has been operating inside a surveillance architecture that closed those gaps before the doctrine was deployed against it. The question that follows from this engagement is the one Russian maritime planners are working through. The Baltic Shadow Fleet operation failed because the convoy's acoustic signatures were pre-characterized. The AIS blackout triggered enhanced monitoring rather than reduced visibility. The Spetsnaz action was documented before it could be characterized as a rescue, and the communication suppression prevented the narrative package from reaching distribution. Each of those failure points represents a specific capability that was either new to the Baltic environment or newly integrated across national boundaries. Which of those 4 failure points is most difficult to architect around in the next iteration of this operation? And if the answer is the pre-characterized acoustic signatures, the fact that NATO now holds a continuously updated acoustic library of every Shadow Fleet vessel that has transited monitored waters, does the Shadow Fleet doctrine have a viable future in any sea that connects to Baltic or North Sea monitoring infrastructure? Leave your analysis in the comments.